I'm here at the OpenStorage EMEA Summit 2012, sitting with Powell, CEO of Nexenta. Can you tell us a little bit about how Nexenta started?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Tony. So Nexenta originally was purely an open source project, started by two founders, Alex and Dimitri, who had worked together on the iSCSI stack for Linux. So
right.
OpenISCSI.org.
Okay.
The day that Sun open sourced ZFS back in 2004, they grabbed it and they spun it into an open source distribution. So this is really the initial beginnings of Nexenta. It was about how do you get ease of use plus this great file system, ZFS. Now, if you fast forward a little bit, one particular user at Stanford, but there were others, who got in touch with the team and said, let me explain to you why I'm using Nexenta, the open source component, but instead of NetApp. What use case? How do I use this? And at the beginning it was disk-to-disk backup, it was snapshots for replication and so forth. And so Alex and Dimitri listened, and they ended up deciding to get me involved in 2007 and to create a solution that they had already started on called Nexenta Store, which is, we immediately came up with the mission of enterprise class storage for everyone. So it's focusing this really several million lines of code on enterprise storage. And we also decided to remain open at the core, so the open source core, not to fork, which someone else has done in the past. They've not been successful at it. And to not sell hardware, which we got a lot of recommendations that we should sell hardware because that's where the money is. So we decided to stay open, sell software only, focus on enterprise class storage for everyone as a mission, and to some extent you see the results today so far, early results.
Hundreds of partners?
Yep, hundreds of partners, and the partners are taking, as you know, our solution, turning it into a total solution that is more than price competitive with the legacy vendors, and so forth. So that's a little bit about the history.
Could you elaborate further about the transition from closed to open, through which the storage industry is going?
Sure. So last fall, just as an example, we received quite a bit of press because one journalist in particular really did his job. He heard that VMware, running their own hands-on lab, creating not 5, 10, or 1,000 VMs, but 150,000 VMs at VMworld, was using us, Nexenta Store with commodity hardware. In this case, again, it was, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure it was S-Tech drives and Supermicro hardware. And that, of course, begged the question, why Nexenta Store, when, after all, VMware is owned by a storage company? And that created a bit of a buzz, and it also annoyed EMC to such an extent that somebody at EMC responded to that article, and you can Google it. It's the Hands-on Lab articles by Chris Meller from the Register. And in that response, EMC emphatically stated, we use commodity hardware too. So not only is Nexenta running on commodity hardware, so is EMC, which we had been saying, because we know it's true, for years, but it was the first time, I think, for many readers, people in the storage industry or on the buying side, that they realized that basically this was the business model of EMC and of legacy storage, NetApp as well. Sell you commodity hardware, lock you in through their business model and through the physics of moving, petabytes of data. Because once it's on their disk, it's very hard to move it. Write it in a proprietary format, so you can't take that disk with your data and have it managed. You can't go and take a NetApp formatted disk and have it managed by EMC. It's impossible. You have to literally move the data. and then charge you massive amounts for commodity hardware. So the basic question is who's going to benefit from Moore's Law? And I know we're going to talk about Intel.
Right.
The billions of dollars of CapEx Intel is putting into every year improving the hardware, the tens or hundreds of millions that S-Tech has put in, the Toshibas, the flash vendors themselves.
Right.
So who benefits? Is it the user or the vendor? And so we decided it was time for an open model that pass those benefits on to the end user. So that's it. I think it's well admitted at this point, again, even by the EMCs of the world and certainly NetApp, that they're software companies and that they add value as software and service, not in hardware, absolutely not hardware. And yet all their money comes from hardware. Not all of it, but the vast, vast, vast majority.
Isn't it a big risk for the EMCs of this world?
Yes. It's a big risk. But EMC has been brilliant in a lot of ways, not least of which was buying another company that sort of came out of Stanford, one that's arguably the most important, in my opinion, certainly in infrastructure IT, VMware. So EMC is more or less half their value or more is VMware. So yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. And the way they've managed it in terms of letting VMware buy product from us. I will tell you, every time VMware buys from us, there is one other vendor in the mix. Every time, every deal, they have to explain why us and not EMC. But that's smart still on the part of EMC, not to force VMware. No, you will only support EMC. And the result has been, I think, VMware's flourished into a real force, an incredible company in IT. So that's smart. I mean, we talked a lot about cloud today. The biggest cloud vendor is VMware.
Right.
But if you talk to folks about internet scale clouds, they're not talking VMware. So it's not seen as the cool vendor often. But the reality is, it's winning.
They have 90% of the market.
They have 90% of the market, and it's because it's
It's
easier
like
to
it.
use, it's proven, they have several year head start, and they keep adding to it. So EMC was very smart there. NetApp, arguably an even better run company historically than EMC, and so we'll see what they end up deciding to do.
Right. For the viewers that are not familiar with open source can have two phases: the community phase
Right.
and the professional, industrial, commercial phase. How does Nexenta combine those two?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our roots, as you heard when I was talking about the history, are very much the community phase, if you
Right.
will, and coming out of Linux, and specifically really the Debian world, which if you know, Linux is one of the Uber communities, right?
Yeah, right.
And so one of our fundamental challenges, if you will, as a company is to contribute to open source, and I'll talk more about that, but to understand that our buyers are enterprise storage operations buyers and engineers, and for them, the openness and is less expensive, is less important than the absolute reliability. So we have a culture that very much is, as I said today, everybody signs a pledge that says, I understand my buyer's an enterprise operations buyer, and he or she risks the loss of their job if they lose access to the data. So we've really gone from certainly open source roots. I'll talk about how we contribute to Lumos in a second. We take it seriously, and we're contributing back everything in the kernel. And we have a published statement on how fast we're going to publish it back, so we're trying to be transparent and be held accountable, hold ourselves accountable. And so we take it seriously, but if you deal with us as a company, literally 98 to 99% of users of Nexenta Store really don't care so much about the community. They don't want vendor lock-in. That's true. What they want is savings and absolute security in their data, and that both means correct data integrity issues, replicate, snapshot, integrate with semantic, which we'll be talking more
And a
about.
transparent SLA.
Transparent SLA. They want uptime. They want a namespace
Right.
that scales horizontally. They want those things with increased flexibility and savings. And it just, open source is an enabler.
Right.
It's interesting. A couple years ago, I heard got to know one of the CTO or at Red Hat, and he was talking about, somebody asked him how do you sell open source to enterprise? And he's like, very easy. We don't mention open source to enterprise. I mean, it's not even in the discussion. We don't come in and say, wouldn't the world be nicer if, or whatever. We come in and say, here's a better, in their case, operating system. Here's our SLAs, to your point. Here's how it'll make you more productive and save you money. And we take a very similar mindset. We wouldn't be here without open source. We respect it. We contribute back to it. It's a core part of our value proposition is lack of vendor lock-in in the software-only model, so you benefit from Moore's Law, not us so much. But we're not out there saying, hey, make the world greener, per se. What we're saying is do your job faster with less money, and open source is an enabler.
Right. Talking about data, big data. Big data is exploding. We talked in one of the forums today. We talked about what's the biggest growth in big data. That's, for example, forensics.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, big data, the fundamental light bulb moment for me was maybe a year and a half ago. And I was in one of these system integrators that build systems that are, classified.
Right.
And what they were saying is basically now that community has realized, thanks to new algorithms, more processing capabilities, that they can do things like scan across every line of every bit of data they have to see if your photo's in it. It's an extreme case, but it's real. So what does that mean? Well, they have more analytics, they're spending up. But the other thing it means is never delete any more data. It's now really valuable. And when you really think about that, it's extremely daunting. So now, yeah, it's good to be able to, back testing your trades and really being able to do that efficiently from a CPU perspective. What does that do? It makes you want to keep all the trades, all the market data forever. And you just go down the list. The smarter we get at making sense out of data, the more data we want to keep. That's sort of the fundamental. But for us, our pitch, if you will, is somewhat diverges slightly from others in that we believe that the data, even in big data, ought to be safe forever. And I'll tell you, we have trading operations at a big, name brand Wall Street firm, who and we asked them the question. So wait a minute, you said you're using in their case Lustre and Hadoop. Why us? And they said, no, we're creating data, roughly a petabyte a week of data. We have a lot of money. We don't have that much money. We can't keep 3 or 4 copies of this stuff lying around. And that is the Hadoop typical. If you just think of Hadoop as a way to store your data, what it does is just says, oh, forget RAID. What I'm going to do is have multiple copies all over the place and trust the network to get the data back if I lose it, which is expensive and potentially slow. So our argument, and this is how users are using us with Hadoop, is you just use us as a local file system. So now you don't need to keep, instead of keeping 3 replicas, maybe you keep 2.
Right.
And already you have significant savings. But anyway, yeah, Hadoop and big data, and quite frankly, I think people don't talk enough about SAP's HANA as well. They have an in-memory database. It's like a columnar database. And they're also talking about going from running pricing. If you're a big retail, I think that SAP dominates retail pretty much. Instead of running it every night, run it right now. Just keep running it. Continue to look at the data, and so you make real-time decisions, which is wonderful. But what it means is you have to have data, you have to have storage that can perform, in this case with HANA, and you have to have storage that can scale out and down, we would argue, and that keeps the data safe forever. So,
Real-time data analysis is a whole different business.
yes,
And it didn't flourish because Moore's law is nice, but they really need computing power.
yes.
And that also goes for the file system. Can you elaborate on how Nexenta store scales, is predictable, and with especially predictable performance?
Well, one of the points that I would make is that today, sort of as we speak with with our 3.1.3 release with Romley, which is the Intel
right.
name for really a fundamentally better architecture at the level of the chips, where Intel will be able to go to many dozens of core systems through this ring architecture. Intel has also come out with, it's part of the same architecture, Romley being one of them, massively more bandwidth within the system to the memory and to the SSDs.
That's important.
And it's very important, yeah. They also have on this may be for storage, the highest profile thing. They have on the chipset what's called SAS controller. What does this mean? It means hardware RAID is dead. And Intel is publicly saying hardware RAID is, they don't say it's dead, but they're saying don't bother. You use Intel. We now have SAS right on the motherboard. We have plenty of power. So why put another little proprietary chip down on the disks? Doesn't make any sense. We support software RAID, as you know. We support Romley. We're first major, quasi-major in our case, vendor to support it. We leverage some of the instruction sets to accelerate some of what we do. And anyway, so that helps on the predictability of performance. How do we really get predictable performance? One key point is we get the new hardware pretty early. We integrate it. We are a software company, to be clear, right?
Yeah, right.
But if we don't know how it's going to perform with the leading hardware, we don't have an enterprise class solution.
Right.
So we have to be able to present predictable results. So the all SSD appliance is a great example of that, where we worked with STEC, Aerostore, and others to put together a solution that will do a sustained 250, I think we're saying 268,000, whatever the exact number is, sustained write IOPS at a low latency. And there it's, it's tuning, it's integration, it's testing, it's all of those things, and it's having partnerships with folks like STEC or STEC and Intel, frankly, so that we know, how is it going to perform. Then as part of our business model, just to finish the point, we require partners. I mean, the reason this event is so big, it's not huge, but a couple hundred people now, is in part because partners come 2 or 3 days early to get trained. So we train them, we certify them, and then we certify the hardware, and then we design these LSSD solutions. So the whole thing is a known set of performance, and again, the integrators know what they're doing.
Very good. Going back to today, you presented Nexenta VSA for VMware View, lots of other developments. Could you say that if large organizations are insecure about the cloud and the cost, they should look at Nexenta?
Yes, absolutely. So one of our bigger VMware private cloud customers is VMware.
Right.
And there's many others. So we work quite well with VMware for private cloud or public cloud, which there are some public clouds on VMware, of course. The fundamental reason is the use of SSDs and the fact we can handle the workload very well. You extend that, as you alluded to VDI. VDI
Right.
storage performance and price, or is the fundamental inhibitor. And it's why sort of the vision of an easier desktop has not come true, despite some pretty amazing products from Citrix and VMware. So Nexenta VSA for View, we believe, fundamentally transforms the economics of VDI. So now it's cheaper on a CapEx basis. It's always been cheaper to manage
Where CapEx
desktops,
stands for capital expenditure,
capital
right?
expenditures. So from an upfront cash spending perspective, we believe Nexenta VSA for View makes VDI cheaper. So virtual desktops are always in a way cheaper to manage. That's the whole idea. You have one console and you manage 1,000, 10,000 desktops as opposed to running around everybody's laptops.
Right, right.
Now, the management side they have, but they've been so expensive, predominantly on the storage side, where storage can be half or more of the cost of doing a virtual desktop deployment, that VDI is not taken off. You take an Nexenta VSA in, it's dead simple, so you're saving time on management again. You as a desktop operator, you may not even have to talk to the storage guys, right? You're just buying servers, add a few more disks. We have reference architectures from our partners. Get one of those, now you have compute, meaning the VMware, vSphere, and Nexenta Store in the form of VSA for View on one box, and away you go.
Okay, I've read numbers that in that way you can save about 100 to 1 or realize a 100 to 1 reduction in space.
In space?
Yeah, storage space.
Yes, so one of the things we're leveraging, that's true, is our inline deduplication, which helps. Frankly, one of the fundamental things is even before you dedupe, don't dupe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So don't dupe in the first place. How do you prevent the duping? You use linked clones. I think you mentioned it even in your write-up, Tony. So by using that cloning capability, you're going to save a lot of space as well. It does depend a lot on workload and how many profiles do you have for the customer and all this kind of stuff. So
lots of variables.
Lots of variables, but we have even hosting companies using us for the VDI storage today, not VSA for View, but the Nexenta Store itself, getting that kind of ratio. Really eye-opening, 50 or 100 to 1. On the whole, we wouldn't necessarily claim 100 to 1, but there will be some savings.
Right. Okay. What's up for the future?
So today's, I think, the first time where I publicly said we intend to be the top storage provider in the world in 5 years. What does that mean? Well, our first goal was to help create and lead this open storage market, and I think we're not done, but so far so good. But what we're now saying is there's a broader goal, which is to say, in terms of systems deployed or in terms of money spent on the software component of storage for our use cases, which are cloud, VDI, primary storage, and all of the GIS mapping, right the middle of the
huge
data center,
too, yeah.
And big data, that we intend to be first in 5 years. So that's one of those hairy, audacious goals, but we think it's happening. So how do you get there? For us, we're in 50, we believe, of the top 100 NAS or unified storage deals in the US and Europe today. These are accounts that have typically 100 or more NetApps. So the fundamental thing we're doing every day, every quarter, is making sure they're delighted, very happy. And because, as I said today, our average customer now goes from, they spend or expand by at least 7x in the life with us. And for the big guys, it's 18x and growing.
That's huge.
So that's fundamentally our job. Now, will we add new capability? We talked about scale out, object storage. We have some ideas on how Swift, we're contributing, that's another open source.
Can you explain a little bit more about Swift?
So we, at some level, believe in OpenStack. We like CloudStack as well, but there's a couple of these open competitors to VMware for the cloud, right? And that at their basic level are cloud management infrastructure all the way down to the piece that manages where the VMs are and even where the blocks go in the data that are used by the Amazons or Rackspaces of the world. So these are two leading ones we believe are OpenStack and CloudStack. So CloudStack is Citrix. OpenStack is a real foundation.
Right.
came out of rack space primarily, and NASA a little bit in the US. Anyway, so what Swift is that very naive object storage, which basically says, amongst other things, hey, you know, developers to the cloud, they think in terms of put and get. What's this file system stuff? We don't need no stinking file systems. You know, we're just do put and get, and it's all great. We think that Swift, as it is becoming a de facto standard. So the way, literally, the S3 type interfaces, even Cloud Stack, which again is the Citrix side, they use Swift. Basically, the interfaces are the same. So
Right.
for the hosting company or private cloud guys who want to be able to push data as a put, you know, each TCP put and get and all, it just works. So we felt like it was important to bring the power of ZFS, which keeps the data safe forever, to Cloud Stack and to OpenStack and to Swift specifically. We also have some ideas in the OpenStack community about how Swift can be more enterprise class in the future, and we are contributing not just ideas but code.
Right.
Which is, you know, from the
Contributing it
open
back.
source side,
Right.
yeah, it's all about code, or it all.
Right.
So what does that mean? So for example, one of our developers is the 5th biggest contributor now to Swift. So when we say we're commercializing a Swift front end to an Nexenta store, I mean, it's not just marketing, right? We're open sourcing and contributing that code as we speak,
Right.
all the time. That's short of it. The other thing I'd say though about OpenStack is we are, I believe, one of 2 vendors that have a driver in what's called Nova, and I get into the nomenclature a little bit, but what Nova is, as you know, is basically the piece that controls compute.
Right.
Swift is basically the piece that controls storage as a service. Turns out the compute side really can't use the Swift. It's got high performance requirements, and it uses a lot of storage. Korea Telecom uses us for that use case. They have about 100 petabytes on the floor, is what I've heard. That's a lot of storage. What they use is they use us with this Nova driver now, which basically means if you're an OpenStack user, you can manage everything, including us, without having to ever look at our GUI or any of that. Just it's all through APIs. And we've done some reference architecture work, and obviously a lot of testing to integrate. So when you look at OpenStack, again, it's some storage via Swift, mainly storage as a service, S3, but also there's massive storage in the compute, and we integrate with both sides.
So Nexenta is very interoperable with OpenStack.
Yes, yeah.
It's all about interoperability.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have good business.
Thank you.
And let's go to the conference.
All right.